Sarah Martinez stepped out of her black sedan and looked at the towering glass building that housed Meridian National Bank's downtown branch. At 34, she had worked her way up from a junior analyst to become the youngest CEO in the bank's history. Today was different from her usual corporate meetings and board presentations. She had decided to visit their branches unannounced, dressed in simple jeans and a plain sweater, to see how her employees really treated customers. The idea had come to her during a late-night review of customer complaint reports. Too many stories of rude staff, dismissive attitudes, and poor service had crossed her desk. She needed to see the truth for herself, not the polished version presented in monthly reports. Walking through the heavy glass doors, Sarah noticed the marble floors were spotless and the modern fixtures gleamed under the bright lights. Everything looked perfect on the surface. She approached the information desk where a young woman with perfectly styled hair sat typing on her computer. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely. "I'd like to open a business account and discuss a loan for my small restaurant." The receptionist barely looked up from her screen. "Take a number and wait over there," she said, pointing to a row of uncomfortable-looking chairs. "Business accounts are handled by Mr. Thompson, but he's busy with important clients today." Sarah took the small paper ticket with the number 47 printed on it. She glanced at the digital display showing they were currently serving number 31. The waiting area had about 15 people, some checking their phones, others looking frustrated as they watched the slow-moving numbers. An elderly man sitting next to her shook his head. "Been waiting 2 hours," he muttered. "They keep saying the manager will see me soon, but every time someone in a nice suit walks in, they get taken right away." Sarah observed quietly as exactly what the man described happened 3 more times. Well-dressed individuals would approach the desk, whisper something to the receptionist, and get escorted immediately to the back offices while everyone else continued waiting. When her number was finally called, Sarah walked to the designated window. The teller, a middle-aged woman with a name tag reading Janet, looked her up and down with obvious disapproval. "What can I do for you?" Janet asked in a tone that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "I need to open a business checking account and I'm interested in discussing a loan," Sarah explained. "I'm starting a small restaurant and need financing." Janet's expression grew even more skeptical. "A restaurant? Do you have any idea how many of those fail in the first year?" She pulled out a basic information form and slapped it on the counter. "Fill this out, but honestly, you probably don't qualify for what you're thinking." Sarah began filling out the form, writing down her real information, but listing her job as food service worker and her address as her modest apartment rather than her executive home. She wanted to see how far this would go. "Income?" Janet asked, glancing at the form. "About 40,000 a year," Sarah replied. Janet laughed out loud. 40,000? Honey, you can't get a decent business loan with that kind of money. Maybe try one of those payday loan places down the street." Sarah kept her expression neutral despite the growing anger inside her. "I'd still like to speak with a manager about my options," she said calmly. Janet rolled her eyes dramatically. "Fine, but you're wasting everyone's time." She picked up her phone and spoke loudly enough for other customers to hear. "Mr. Thompson?" "Yeah. I've got another one of those dreamers here who thinks they can get a business loan with no money. Should I send them back or just give them the rejection packet?" After a brief pause, Janet hung up. "He'll see you in a few minutes. But don't get your hopes up. Mr. Thompson doesn't like to waste time on impossible cases." Sarah waited another 20 minutes before being called to a small office in the back. The nameplate on the desk read, "Robert Thompson, Branch Manager." He was a stocky man in his 50s with graying hair and an expensive suit that seemed a size too small. Without looking up from his computer, Thompson gestured to the chair across from his desk. "So Janet tells me you want a business loan for a restaurant. What kind of collateral are you offering?" "I was hoping we could discuss the options," Sarah began. Thompson finally looked at her, his eyes taking in her casual clothes and simple appearance. "Options?" He chuckled. "Look, miss," he glanced at her application. "Martinez, I've been in banking for 25 years. I can tell within 30 seconds if someone is serious borrower material." He leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying what he saw as his superior position. "You make 40 grand a year, you want to start a restaurant, and you're dressed like you shop at discount stores. Do you have any idea what commercial real estate costs? What about equipment, permits, insurance? Sarah remained calm. I understand there are significant costs. That's why I'm here to discuss financing options. Thompson laughed again, this time more condescending. Financing options? The bank doesn't throw money at pipe dreams. We need serious borrowers with serious assets. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a glossy brochure. Here's information about our small business loans. Minimum qualification is a credit score above 750, 2 years of tax returns showing steady income growth, and collateral worth at least 50% of the loan amount. He slid the brochure across the desk without really expecting her to take it seriously. Even if by some miracle you qualified, the interest rates for someone in your situation would be astronomical. We're talking 15, maybe 20%. Sarah picked up the brochure and pretended to study it. What if I had more substantial backing? Say, if I could provide better collateral or a co-signer? Thompson's expression turned even more dismissive. Unless your co-signer is Warren Buffett, I doubt it would make much difference. Look, I appreciate that you have dreams, but banking is about reality. Cold, hard financial reality. He stood up, clearly signaling the meeting was over. My advice? Save your money for a few more years. Maybe take some business classes at the community college. Come back when you have something real to offer. Sarah wasn't ready to leave yet. She had heard enough to understand the problem, but she wanted to see just how far this manager's arrogance would go. What if I told you I could bring in a substantial cash deposit to support the loan application? Thompson sat back down, but his expression remained skeptical. How substantial are we talking about? Would $50,000 change your assessment? Sarah asked quietly. This got Thompson's attention, but only slightly. $50,000 is better than nothing. But for a restaurant startup, you'd need at least 3 times that amount to be taken seriously. And that's assuming you actually have $50,000, which... He looked at her clothes again. No offense, but seems unlikely. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. What if I could show you that I have access to more than that? Thompson's interest was piqued, but his attitude remained condescending. Look, I've seen people fake bank statements before. Anyone with a computer can make official-looking documents these days. I'm not talking about documents, Sarah said. I'm talking about actual account access. She opened her banking app, making sure the screen was turned slightly away so Thompson couldn't see the details, but positioned so he could see she was actually in a real banking interface. Even if you have some money saved up, Thompson continued, having funds and having sustainable business income are completely different things. The bank has to consider long-term viability, not just initial deposits. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right about long-term viability being important. What would you say if someone could demonstrate not just current funds, but ongoing financial stability? Thompson was getting slightly more interested despite himself. What kind of ongoing stability? Regular monthly income of, say, $25,000? Sarah suggested. Thompson laughed out loud. $25,000 a month? You just told Janet you make $40,000 a year. Now you're claiming you make $300,000 annually? This is exactly the kind of fantasy thinking that gets loan applications rejected. He stood up again, this time more firmly. I think we're done here. I don't appreciate having my time wasted with obvious lies. Security can escort you out if necessary. Sarah remained seated, her voice still calm and professional. Before you call security, what would you say to someone who offered to put down $200,000 as collateral for a business loan? This stopped Thompson in his tracks. $200,000? His tone shifted slightly, though skepticism remained. You're telling me that someone who works in food service and makes $40,000 a year has $200,000 in collateral to offer? I'm asking hypothetically, Sarah replied. If someone walked in here with that kind of backing, would your attitude toward their loan application change? Thompson sat back down slowly. Of course, substantial collateral changes things. But we're talking about fantasy numbers here. You can't just throw around big figures and expect to be taken seriously. What if it wasn't fantasy? Sarah asked quietly. Thompson leaned forward, his curiosity finally overcoming his dismissive attitude. All right, I'll play along with your hypothetical scenario. If someone actually had $200,000 in verified collateral, yes, we would consider their application more seriously, but the interest rate would still reflect their income level and credit risk. What kind of interest rate? Sarah asked. For someone in your situation, even with substantial collateral, we'd be looking at 12 to 15%. High-risk borrower, unproven business concept. Limited income history. Thompson was warming to his role as the banking expert, explaining harsh realities to a naive dreamer. Sarah nodded as if considering this information carefully. And if someone could demonstrate even more substantial financial backing, say $500,000 in available assets? Thompson's laugh had a slightly different quality now, less dismissive but still disbelieving. $500,000? Now you're really getting into fantasy land. But hypothetically speaking, yes, that level of collateral would definitely change the conversation. We might be able to offer something closer to prime rate, maybe 8 or 9%. That's still quite high, Sarah observed. It's the reality of commercial lending, Thompson replied, his tone taking on a lecturing quality. Banks have to protect themselves. Even with excellent collateral, new businesses fail all the time. The interest rate reflects that risk. Sarah appeared to be thinking this over. What if I told you I could provide not just collateral, but also demonstrate a track record of successful financial management? What kind of track record? Thompson was now paying full attention, though his skepticism remained evident. Investment portfolio management, corporate financial oversight, experience with million-dollar budget, Sarah said quietly. Thompson stared at her for a long moment. You're claiming you have experience managing million-dollar budgets while working in food service for $40,000 a year? I'm exploring hypothetical scenarios to understand your lending criteria, Sarah replied smoothly. Thompson shook his head. Look, I admire persistence, but these wild claims aren't helping your case. If you actually had the kind of financial background and resources you're hinting at, you wouldn't need to come in here dressed like... He gestured vaguely at her casual outfit. Like what? Sarah asked, her voice still calm but with a slight edge that Thompson didn't catch. Like someone who shops at thrift stores and has never seen the inside of a boardroom, Thompson finished bluntly. Successful business people present themselves professionally. They understand that appearance matters in financial dealings. Sarah smiled slightly. So you base your lending decisions on how people dress? Of course not officially, Thompson backtracked quickly. But presentation is part of credibility assessment. Someone asking for a substantial business loan should look the part, even if they have the financial backing to support the loan. Especially then, Thompson said confidently. If you really had significant assets, you'd dress appropriately, drive a decent car, and probably already have established relationships with private bankers who handle high-net-worth clients. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting perspective. So you're saying that regardless of someone's actual financial position, if they don't look wealthy enough, you wouldn't take their loan application seriously? Thompson realized he might be walking into dangerous territory. I'm saying that consistency matters. Financial behavior, presentation, and claims should all align. When they don't, it raises red flags. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a business card holder. She extracted a simple white card and placed it on Thompson's desk. You're absolutely right about consistency being important in banking. Thompson glanced at the card dismissively at first, then did a double take. His face went pale as he read the elegant script. Sarah Martinez, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian National Bank. This is some kind of joke, Thompson stammered, looking back and forth between Sarah and the card. Anyone can print fake business cards. Sarah calmly pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Patricia? This is Sarah Martinez. Could you please call the downtown branch and ask to speak with Robert Thompson? Tell him his CEO is in his office and needs verification of her identity. Thompson watched in growing horror as his desk phone rang 30 seconds later. With shaking hands, he picked up the receiver. Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Chen from the executive office. I'm calling to confirm that CEO Sarah Martinez is currently meeting with you. She's conducting an unannounced branch inspection and needs to verify her identity. Can you confirm you're speaking with a woman in her 30s with dark hair? Thompson's voice cracked as he replied. Yes, that matches. Perfect. Ms. Martinez will be conducting her review for the next hour. Please provide her with full cooperation and access to any information she requests. Thank you. The line went dead. Thompson sat in stunned silence, staring at Sarah as if she were a ghost. Now then, Sarah said, her voice taking on a completely different tone of authority. Let's discuss what I've observed during my visit today. Your receptionist told me to take a number and wait over there like I was an inconvenience. Your teller Janet laughed at my income level and suggested I try a payday loan company. And you've spent the last 30 minutes explaining why someone like me could never qualify for decent lending terms. Thompson opened his mouth, but no words came out. Sarah continued. You told me that banks don't throw money at pipe dreams, that I should take community college classes and come back when I have something real to offer. You judged my creditworthiness based on my clothing and suggested I couldn't possibly have substantial assets because I don't look wealthy enough. Ms. Martinez, I had no idea. Thompson finally managed to speak. Of course you didn't know who I was. That was the entire point. Sarah's voice was calm but firm. I wanted to see how my bank treats ordinary customers who don't arrive in expensive suits and luxury cars. What I found is deeply troubling. Thompson was sweating now, his expensive suit suddenly feeling very uncomfortable. Ma'am, if you had known, you would have treated me completely differently. And that's exactly the problem. Sarah stood up and walked to the window overlooking the main banking floor. Every customer who walks through those doors deserves professional, respectful service regardless of their appearance or account balance. She turned back to face Thompson, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. You assumed I was lying about having substantial funds because I wasn't dressed expensively. You decided I was wasting your time before you even heard what I had to offer. I apologize profusely, Thompson said quickly. This is completely out of character for me. I must have been having a bad day. Sarah held up her hand. Mr. Thompson, in the last hour, I've watched you and your staff dismiss multiple customers based on nothing but superficial judgments. This isn't about one bad day. This is about systemic problems with customer service and lending practices. Sarah returned to her seat and looked directly at Thompson, who was now visibly trembling. Let me tell you what's going to happen next. First, you and your entire staff will undergo comprehensive customer service retraining. Second, we're implementing new policies to ensure every customer inquiry is handled with the same level of professionalism, regardless of the customer's appearance or stated income level. Thompson nodded frantically. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you think is necessary. Third, Sarah continued, we're establishing a mystery shopper program. Corporate representatives will regularly visit branches unannounced to assess customer treatment. Poor performance will result in immediate corrective action. She pulled out a small notebook and began writing. I'm also implementing new loan evaluation procedures. Every application will be assessed solely on financial criteria, not on subjective judgments about the applicant's appearance or perceived social status. Thompson watched nervously as she continued writing. Ma'am, I want you to know that I've learned from this experience. I'll do everything possible to improve our service standards. Sarah looked up from her notebook. Mr. Thompson, you told me earlier that you could tell within 30 seconds if someone was serious borrower material. You were completely wrong about me, which makes me wonder how many qualified applicants you've dismissed based on similar snap judgments. I realize now that was inappropriate, Thompson said quietly. It was more than inappropriate. It was discriminatory and potentially illegal. Sarah's voice carried the weight of her position now. Banks have legal obligations to evaluate loan applications fairly, without bias based on appearance, clothing, or perceived social status. She stood up and walked toward the door, then paused. You also mentioned that if I really had significant assets, I would already have relationships with private bankers who handle high net worth clients. For your information, I do have those relationships, but I also believe that every branch of this bank should be capable of serving every customer professionally. Thompson struggled to find words. How can I make this right? Sarah turned back to face him one final time. By remembering this lesson every single day, by treating every person who walks through that door as someone who deserves respect and professional service, by focusing on actual financial qualifications rather than superficial appearances. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Oh, and Mr. Thompson? The next time someone tells you they have substantial funds to support a loan application, you might want to take them seriously. You never know when that person might actually be telling the truth. As Sarah walked through the main banking area, she noticed that word had already begun to spread among the staff. The receptionist, who had barely looked up earlier, now watched nervously as she passed. Janet, the teller who had suggested she try a payday loan company, stood frozen at her window. Sarah didn't stop to address them directly. She had made her point with Thompson, and she trusted that the message would cascade through the branch quickly. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the CEO had visited in disguise and witnessed their unprofessional behavior firsthand. Walking out the same glass doors she had entered 2 hours earlier, Sarah felt a mixture of disappointment and determination. The visit had confirmed her suspicions about customer service problems, but it had also given her the first-hand knowledge she needed to implement meaningful changes. As she got back into her sedan, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "How did the branch visit go?" Sarah typed back, "Very educational. Schedule a meeting with all branch managers for tomorrow morning. We have some important policy changes to discuss." She drove away knowing that her unannounced visit would lead to real improvements in how the bank treated every customer who walked through their doors, regardless of their appearance or the assumptions others might make about their financial capabilities.